Our next section is 3.2, but first we would do our bell problem. Again, we are classifying our system as independent, dependent, or inconsistent. To be able to do this, remember you have to solve each of our equations out for y. So go ahead and do that and come back. For the first equation, you should get y equals negative 1/2 x plus 4/3. And for the second equation, you should get y equals negative 1/2 x minus 3/2. Notice how your slopes are the same, but our y-intercepts are different. So we have the same slope but different y-intercepts, so it's not the same line. But our line is rising and falling at the same pace, so they will be parallel lines, which means they will never intersect, so it is classified as inconsistent because it has no solutions. We'll be spending 2 days on 3.2 solving systems algebraically. By the end of this, you'll be able to solve systems of equations algebraically. For equivalent systems, it must be a system that has the same solutions. Now the first method we're going to talk about for algebraically is the substitution method. To be able to do the substitution method, you must solve one of the equations for one of its variables. So again, we're going to have x and y. We're going to have to solve one of our equations for either x or y. 2. Substitute the expression from step 1 into the other equation and solve for the other variable. So say in our first step we solved our first equation for x. We would then plug that into our second equation for x and solve for y. Once you have solved for y, you plug that back into one of your original equations, which is step 3. Substitute the value from step 2 into the revised equation from step 1 and solve, which will give us then x. So for our first example, we have our two equations, 2x plus 5y equals negative 5, and x plus 3y equals 3. Now, when I use the substitution method, I always look to find a variable that has no number out front, because it's easiest to solve for. We won't have to divide by any number. So I look at my second equation here, and I have x plus 3y equals 3. So the first step of substitution is to get your one variable by itself. So we need to subtract everything to the other side. So we subtract 3y to both sides. And we get x equals, now we can't combine 3 and negative 3y to get nothing. 3 minus 3 is 0, because our 3 in the top equation does not have a y. So it will be x equals negative 3y plus 3. Then step 2, we substitute into our other equation. So since we solved for x, we're going to be substituting our expression for our variable x there. When we do this, I replace my variable with the parentheses, so I have 2. Leave a parenthesis with some space in it to put in our expression, plus 5y equals negative 5. Now, since we solved our first equation for x, I plug it in for my variable x over here, which is negative 3y plus 3. And if you notice, my new equation only has a variable y in it. So go ahead and solve this out for y. Don't forget to distribute our 2 to both terms inside our parentheses and combine like terms. And come back and we'll go over what we get for y. So when you solve it out for y, you should get 11. So you should get y equals 11. Next, we have to plug this back in to find x. So pick one of the equations, doesn't matter which one. I would use this one here. Because we already solved out for x, all we have to do is plug in our y variable there and solve for x. So 11 times negative 3 is negative 33. Plus 3, we get negative 30. So our solution is negative 30. So 3, 11. Go ahead and do the same thing. Find a variable that has x or y with no number in front of it. Alright, and once you solve this out, I solved the second equation for x, substitute into a first equation, and I got y equals negative 2. Once I plugged that back in, I got x equals 1, so the solution was 1, negative 2. And the last one, again, find your variable that has no number out in front of it, which would be y in the second equation. Substitute that into the first equation, and you should get x equals 28/5. Plug it back in, we get negative 6/5. So our solution is 28/5 and negative 6/5. Come ready to work on this homework tomorrow.